Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Mr. President, distinguished delegates. Current crisis in Syria is gaining new dimensions following further intensification of sectarian violence as well as growth of extremism and criminal and illegal acts by terrorists and extremist groups in this country. We have also witnessed a new rounds of airstrikes by the Israeli regime violating the territorial integrity of Syria. There is a growing concern that the operations of armed groups and a spillover of such acts into other areas in the region will pose further threat and danger to the regional security and stability. This brings more than ever into picture our responsibilities for supporting a Syrian-led political dialogue for a peaceful resolution of the crisis and ending the violence inside Syria. In view of my delegation, the draft resolution is a deviation of all the efforts that are currently pursued at the international level for a peaceful solution. The draft, in its terms and spirit, is also a deviation of the principles enshrined in the Charter of the United Nations and the international law. We cannot and do not agree with this draft for the following reasons. One, it is ironic that in the draft there is no reflection of recent Israeli regime attacks against Syria. The Israeli airstrikes on 3rd and 5th of May 2013 and other previous attacks were all blatant acts of aggression and a clear and serious violation of the norms and principles of the United Nations Charter, including its Article 2, Paragraph 4, on the prohibition of the use of force against any member state. Nothing can justify the use of force and act of aggression against a sovereign state, and the aggressor must be held accountable for any consequences stemming from these condemnable and illegitimate acts which endanger regional and international peace and security. Two, we believe that the United Nations has an important role to play in search for a peaceful solution to the Syrian crisis. But in our view, the draft resolution demonstrates a rather confrontational approach vis-à-vis Syria and in no way helps to bring the parties to a platform of dialogue to resolve the crisis in a peaceful manner that would benefit the Syrian people as a whole. We need to help and facilitate engagement of the Syrian political groups with Syrian government for a Syrian-led political process. Three, despite some changes, the main elements in the final draft resolution still supports the decision taken outside the United Nations and include frameworks and mechanisms that do not correspond to the peaceful initiatives that the UN should pursue under agreed processes, including the framework of the Geneva Action Group for Syria and the regional framework that are pursued with some countries in the region aimed at achieving the prescribed peaceful goals. The draft resolution contains a language that contradicts a comprehensive political process with the support of regional and international initiatives and the mandate of the special envoy. This is also interpreted as being in line with certain attempts to alter or to impose illegitimate demands on the mandate of the special envoy. This would only undermine the special representative and other major international and regional efforts in seeking a complete cessation of the violence in Syria at the very first place. We sincerely hope that Mr. Ibrahimi would stay resolute in his arduous mission. 4, the acknowledgement referred to the draft intrudes on the provisions of the Charter regarding the respect for the sovereignty and integrity of member states. It also represents a dangerous precedent that violates the most elementary principles of the international law. My delegation is not in a position to welcome or endorse the decision where their letters and spirit go against the provisions of the Charter of the United Nations. The United Nations should remain an organization of principles governed by rules of law and not influenced by decisions taken elsewhere. 5, on the issue of the use of chemical weapons in Syria, the Islamic Republic of Iran, as a main victim of the present-day use of chemical weapons, with a heartful sense, condemns the use of such weapons. It's now becoming more clear that certain elements of the Syrian armed opposition groups used chemical weapons, resulted in the death and the injury of a number of innocent civilians in the country, as testified by the UN Human Rights Council appointee, Mrs. Carla De Ponte. 6, the draft is not explicit in recognizing the responsibilities of the armed groups in their recourse to atrocious acts and violence. We believe it is important that the decisions by the United Nations General Assembly to be objective and balanced. 7, the draft violates the authorities and jurisdiction of the General Assembly, where particularly it makes implicitly references to Rome procedure on the International Criminal Court. 8, finally, it is important that any proposal before this Assembly should be based on the broad consultations and consent of the wider membership. It seems that the drafters did not heed the substantive proposals and amendments presented by the representatives of other regional groupings. Mr. President, in conclusion, I would like to point out that at this stage, what is important is to prevent any slowdown in the international efforts to resolve the conflicts in Syria through peaceful means, including the upcoming Geneva II conference for this issue, which we supported as well. The UN member states should, with the greatest sense of responsibility, work hand in hand to find balanced formula for the resolution of the conflict. After all, our organization is about and should remain dedicated in achieving diplomatic resolutions to political crises, including the prevailing situation in Syria. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Islamic Republic of Iran.